Right. I'm Mike Regenstreif in Ottawa, and I'm joined by Murray McLauchlan, who has just released a fabulous new album called Hourglass on the True North label. And just before we get into it, Murray, I'm just going to give you a bit of a personal anecdote of trivia. In February of 1974, when I was not quite 21 years old, I walked into the entertainment editor's office at the Montreal Gazette and said, I can write music reviews. And he said, oh, yeah? So I said, yeah. And he said, well, I'll try you out tonight. There's a Murray McLauchlan concert at Place des Arts. Why don't you go and review that? And I went and reviewed that concert, and that was the start of my journalistic career. Your music is well known and well established here in Canada, where you've been among the front ranks of singer-songwriters for about a half century now. But I suspect that you're not as well known in the US. So for the benefit of our American friends, let's talk a bit about your history. I remember Tom Rush, who was the first American to sing Joni Mitchell songs, did a great version of your Child song early on.
Yeah, I met Tom courtesy of a guitar player named Trevor Veach that was working with him. Mm-hmm. Trevor was a friend of mine. He used to be in a band called Three's a Crowd.
I remember that band,
yeah, they were actually recorded a couple of my tunes before Tom did. But I met Tom at the Riverboat Cafe on Yorkville Avenue, Toronto, where he was playing. And he asked me to play him a couple of songs. So I played him Child song and I played him Old Man song. And he cut both of them on his first record for Columbia Records, which was really, as you mentioned, Tom was the first person to record like, Jackson Browne, Joni Mitchell, pretty well the first person to record, James Taylor's song, as far as I know as well.
Yeah, right.
So if you got recorded by Tom Rush, that was a bit of a leg up in terms of your stature. So very quickly, I went down to New York and I did a publishing deal with the Albert Grossman office. Tom gave me the intro. And so for pretty well the whole year of 1969, I had a little cubicle in the Grossman office, and myself and a guy named Barry Flast ostensibly were, writing hit songs for the various acts that Albert managed. I'm sure we were going to write hit songs for Bob Dylan. But anyway, but during that time, I established quite a little scene in New York. Became part of the folk démements to the point where, I did concerts at Cooper Union Great Hall, Oscar Brand, Theodore Bickel, different people were on the bill, and I played quite a bit around New York at the time. And the reason that I came back was finally Bernie Finkelstein was starting True North Records up. And he was, I think, in the process he was about to begin recording the first Bruce Cockburn album. So I got on the phone with Bernie, and he said, do you want to come up and make a record? I said, yup, absolutely. So I came back to Toronto, got an apartment in Kensington Market, and we recorded Song from the Street. I brought some people up from New York to play on it that I'd worked with. And, slowly, not so slowly, but very surely, we built up quite a little piece of momentum. I started playing the club circuit, both in Canada and in the Eastern United States in particular, pretty meaningfully. So I played a lot, I headlined in places like the Bitter End and the Earl of Old Town in Chicago, and the Main Point in Philadelphia, and Passim in Boston, the Great Southeast Music Hall in Atlanta. So part of the reason that happened was because one of my managers, one of the guy who became one of my team of managers, Bernie Fiedler, who owned the Riverboat, had a sort of a block booking thing going with Paul Colby and various club owners in the United States. So they'd kind of get you had a circuit that you did. Joni did that circuit for a while too, the Chessmate and all those places that were going. But it didn't take very long. I went down to New York to make the second album, and we, with Ed Freeman, the guy who just done Don McLean's American Pie record. And we had a really big success off that record. I was one of the biggest hit records in Canada, I think, came off that record, which was Farmer's Song. And, from that point, I was able to start doing college concerts in Canada while still maintaining a regular circuit of play in the United States. And, the reputation was growing, and Bernie was basically, he had done a distribution deal with Epic Records in New York. So they were kind of on our team now. And, then interestingly enough, when the record with Henry, Down by the Henry Moore, came out, Neil Young was just starting a tour. I called it the Orphan Tour, because his manager at the time, Elliot Roberts, who also managed Joni. Elliot was kind of a friend of mine and on the Bernies. So we were all kind of like a little tight little thing. But Elliot didn't agree with Neil because Neil wanted to do this. It was called the Tonight's the Night Show, was that record, where he wrote a whole pile of songs for one of his road guys who had died of an overdose. So they were all like kind of dark songs. And he wanted to play in small venues, like Boston Symphony Hall, instead of instead of
big arena.
Yeah. And Elliot just wanted nothing to do with that. So he kind of just said, you want to go do that? Fine, go do it. So Neil put the tour together pretty much with his road manager. And he happened to be up in Canada playing. I think it was University of Western Ontario or Guelph. I can't remember which one. But he invited me through the Bernies and stuff just to come out and do some tunes. Like, it wasn't, an opening act thing. It was just like, come on and play some songs. And so I went out and played Henry Moore and Farmer Song and whatever. And I think Neil was quite surprised that the audience started doing backflips. And so he invited me to do the rest of the tour. So myself and Dennis Pendrith, my bass player, and Bernie went on the whole Tonight's the Night tour from Boston to Berkeley. That was quite an experience, to say the least.
Yeah, I'll bet.
So, there was an ongoing trajectory. Eventually, I wound up, once I'd formed the Silver Tractors and had a pretty loud band, we hooked up, Bernie, I should say, hooked up with Chris Blackwell's label, Island Records. He had started an Island Records division in the United States, so we were on that. I took the band down. We started working that record in the United States. First gig, I think, was the Bottom Line in New York. And we got rave reviews, and we got to Chicago, and we were like, front page in the entertainment section in the Chicago
the Great Showcase Club.
Yeah, I mean, it was, John Lennon's girlfriend at the time, May Pang, was hanging around backstage, so I guess we were doing all right. And then oddly enough, Chris Blackwell decided he didn't want to have an American label anymore. So overnight, we went from like to and
the whims of millionaires.
Yeah, it just I had a Canadian tour starting up with the full band, and there was kind of blood in the water because we'd been orphaned by our American label. So suffice it to say, it didn't go well. And eventually, halfway through that tour, I had to basically let the band go and finish the rest of the tour as a folk singer, which kind of was tough. And when that tour was over, I got in my Pontiac hot rod that I had built and said, forgive my language, but fuck this, I've had enough. And I decided to drive Route 66 to LA just for shits and giggles. And, went down there, stayed in the house of this actress named Elizabeth Ashley for a while, and met, Jimmy, all the Jimmies, Jimmy Ferrantino and Jimmy Kahn, all the Jimmies, and hung out there and wrote all the songs that were on Whispering Rain. So came back to Canada, cut Whispering Rain at Eastern Sound Studios, and kaboom, got another big hit record. We did a lot of work on that in Nashville, had the Jordanaires sing background vocals on it, which was fantastic. Like they were the group I remember from all of Patsy Cline and,
Elvis.
Elvis records.
Yeah.
And, they sang on everything really. Ricky Nelson records. I mean, they're like the original kind of fabulous doo-wop singers. So they did all the background vocals on that record. So, I mean, I've been present in the United States for quite a long time.
One of the things that intrigued me is that you, in some of the notes that I've seen, you've mentioned a very different songwriting process for this record than what you've used in the past.
It seems that morphs with whatever particular project I'm working on at the time. When I first hooked up and actually made an original record for Jeff Kulovic when he and Linus took over True North after Bernie sold the label. The methodology then was, well, there's a thing they taught us in art school where you look at what you're drawing and you put like your pencil or your charcoal or whatever on a piece of paper, and you never look at the paper. You just keep drawing whatever you're doing without ever looking at it. You come up with really interesting stuff. So on the Human Rights record, that's kind of what I did. I just started writing. Just sat down, started writing whatever came into my head. Didn't really know what form or where it was going to take me, and got quite really remarkable results out of it. I mean, stuff that I think, really stands up. I could quote you stuff, but I had never really done that before. And then again, subsequent to that, when I did Love Can't Tell Time, there were 3 songs on that I collaborated with a friend who passed away, really great lady, great writer named Allison Gordon.
Mm-hmm.
And they were very special to me. But my background agenda was 2 things. One, really sort of selfish. I wanted to demonstrate that I could actually play the guitar. But the other thing was, all the up and coming jazz singers out there have been kind of doing the same repertoire from the American Songbook forever. And I thought, maybe I can throw out some songs that they could add to that collection, and maybe somebody would be interested in doing them. And people who of goodwill sent them out, to Diana Krall and Tony Bennett, different people. Nobody did any of them, which I think is kind of a shame because they're worth it. But what the hell?
Yeah,
that's the life of a songwriter. And then this one, again, completely different. They started out all of them started their life as poems.
That I think it's a good time for us to talk about the songs individually. I've made a 1 or 2 sentence comment about each of the songs on the album, which I'll read to you, and then let's use that as a starting point for you to comment further on the songs.
I should brace myself with some Pinot Grigio then in my sippy cup.
We'll start with the Thompson Day for Tom Thompson, obviously named for the great Canadian outdoor landscape artist. And as I was listening to the song, I got on the computer and called up some images of Tom Thompson paintings, and I was struck by how your words captured the essence of Thompson's art in the depictions of the serenity of trees and lakes, and ultimately the cycle of life.
Good comment. I mean, the evolution of that song is really long standing. So, I mean, or like most anybody who went to school, public school or whatever in Canada, there's a fair chance that somewhere near the picture of Queen Elizabeth II would have been a picture of the West Wind on the school wall. It's that iconic a piece. Now, I'm really fortunate because I have a membership and everything. I can walk down the road to the Art Gallery of Ontario, and when the painting isn't on the road somewhere, it's on the wall, and I can stand in front of it and look. And it's as breathtaking a piece of art as Botticelli's Primavera. It's really striking, and the energy that's in it is really striking. But the thing that strikes me the most is kind of falling through the painting, because I've been in that painting. And I think there is an energy that comes from being Canadian that is personified in that painting.
The next song is called America, and this is a song that really captures the political divides in the United States, where the country is so divided with those under the sphere of what I'll call Trumpism, who are even just unwilling to accept simple truth. And I think that's at the root of the divides that you're singing about in that song.
Absolutely. I wrote that poem in, before there was the November election, at the height of all of the divisions and spewing of hatred and divisions and characterizing the other as an enemy. And it's, I'd never seen anything like that happen before. I mean, it's, like I'm sure you are too, but I'm a kind of a history nut.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I remember the aftermath of the First World War. I don't remember it, but I've read about the aftermath of the First World War, where the Spanish flu pandemic followed. On top of that, millions of people died, and suddenly economic crash, anti-immigration riots, the rise of the Ku Klux Klan, like all of that happened in the decade after the First World War. Sound familiar?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I do tend to put things in perspective, but I've never seen the kind of polarization and anger that exists there now. And I find it really disappointing. I have much higher hopes for that experiment in Republican democracy than they're currently exhibiting. So I chose the metaphor of writing about America as though it was a married couple that could no longer reconcile and were both seeing opposite hostile divorce lawyers. That really is the spirit of the lyric. It's like writing about an irreconcilable married couple and hoping that they can sort it out.
And I guess the jury is still out on that one, and will be for a while.
Yeah, there are so many elements that are influencing things for the not so good. But the process has begun, I think, to rein in some of those elements, mainly the internet trolls and disinformation on key news outlets. I mean, the United States has done some really stupid things in the last 20 years. One of them being to, kind of deregulate the Broadcasting Act, so that there doesn't have to be fair and balanced commentary anymore. So, guys like Rupert Murdoch can come in and go like, yeah, if we just stick a fork in the hornet's nest, it sells.
And he was right about that.
It's, it certainly sells. Yeah. But it's also destroying their democracy. And of course, the complete unrestrained use of social media by malign players has not helped.
We come now to Hourglass, the title track of the album, and this is a song that seems to question what's really important in the long term, and whether the pursuit of money should be a motivating factor in what we do, or are there more important considerations?
It asks that question, and it asks it very bluntly. Who are you except for the decisions that you make and how you conduct your life? And when you consider that you're part of a society, a global society that depends for its success on untrammeled growth and consumerism and disposability, that's not a really good recipe for your grandchildren.
Mm-hmm.
And also, there's an immoral aspect to it, that more and more people make decisions that are self-centered rather than community or globally centered. And, I mean, there's microcosmic examples of that. And, again, I'm not I'm not on my little soapbox about this, but, and there's always a but. When you look at the way people indulge in recreation with their children in the Lake District in Canada. What life lessons are you teaching your children by towing them around in a rubber raft on a 350 horsepower inboard outboard, creating enormous wakes that kill nesting birds and burning gasoline?
Yeah.
I know you do because you have the money, but isn't it a better life lesson for kids to, learn how to gunnel bob and paddle and sail and actually use their physical skills and their intelligence rather than just like bashing across on a rope and screaming? That's a very small decision, but it's the kind of decisions that people make. And I think they're unfortunate. And I just wish people would look a little bit harder about what they do and what its effect is. So that's part of the motivation behind writing a song like Hourglass, but it's a warning.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Hourglass is like, okay, there's the sand, and it's running and it's running and it's running out. And if we do not make the kind of changes that we need to make, well, they'll be made for us one way or the other, and it won't be good.
And we already see that in terms of things like climate change.
Sure. Australia burning down, California burning down, massive droughts, bigger hurricane seasons. That's just the climate part.
Yeah.
But, what goes hand in hand with that is mammoth social unrest.
And I suspect we haven't seen anything yet when in terms of that.
I'm really hoping that we don't.
Yeah, I hope so too. And
that's why, I mean, when I write a line like, what is it that we really need? Is it bright and shiny stuff? Is it all about the money? Don't we ever have enough? What more do you need than what you need? What exactly is the value of acquiring obscene amounts of wealth just to display obscene and ostentatious ways the fact that you have it? I don't get it. I just don't get it. I don't understand it.
I live on a white cloud, which was dedicated to George Floyd, who was murdered in Minneapolis a little over a year ago. Obviously, in this song, you're coming to terms with what we are, all of us, coming to understand as white privilege.
Yeah. I didn't mean to make that a short answer to your observation, but that's precisely what it's about. It was a poem that was triggered by the revulsion to seeing that man murdered by a police officer on television. It went around the world, and the revulsion was universal because there it was. There's no denying it. There it was, right there in front of us. That guy who killed a man and didn't give a shit. I felt it wasn't enough to go raise my fist and go, this is wrong. This should never have happened. It never should have happened. And it is wrong. But what the circumstances are that allow it to happen are what needs to be examined. And what allows it to happen is deep-rooted racism. Like everybody else on the planet, when we all watched in horror as George Floyd was murdered by a police officer on television. And I think it's one of those things that changed the world. I think it caused everyone to really have a hard look at what's going on. What it did for me was suggest that it's time to turn my eyeballs around and see whether or not any of that shit's in me. What's in there? And to examine the fact that even though, sometimes life has had its difficulties, I won't deny that. But the experience of life for me is very, very different from the experience of practically any person of color or any Aboriginal person, whether it's Australian or North American or Ainu in Japan, for that matter. It's time to take a really good hard look, because ultimately it's ingrained attitudes that fuel this kind of thing, or at least allow for the kind of studied indifference or indulgence that allow it to go on. You know, we're in the middle of a reckoning in Canada with regards to the horror of residential schools. It's the same thing.
Yeah.
You know, I think Andrew Coyne probably said it best, that, you know, there's a couple of, he didn't say this, I'm paraphrasing, okay, but there's a couple of things that have happened this year that I think need to be looked at in the same way that we look at the kind of racism that allowed for the public murder of George Floyd. And, you know, we have to look at no getting around it, what I see as an anti-Muslim bill that's been passed in Quebec, that it's the first time I think that I've ever really felt ashamed to be a Canadian. And then there is the matter of the sudden disclosure on a massive scale of what really occurred in the residential schools and what amounts to a cultural and physical genocide, for which we have to answer. We have to put that right. So we've had the truth. Now we really need the reconciliation.
There really needs to be a widespread thinking about this on terms of, by everyone really, and in terms of how we are part of it and how we have contributed to it, and maybe kept our mouths shut when somebody's made comments, or stood by when we've seen things that we know were wrong.
Fundamentally, whether it was the Holocaust in the Second World War, or whether it was the residential schools and the tearing of Native children away from their families, whatever it was, the fundamental thing is that once you begin to view a class of human beings as being inferior, you're walking down a really dark road.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I don't want to walk that road.
Nor do I. The next song is called "If You're Out There, Jesus," and my sense from this song is a questioning of the moral corruption of religion, or perhaps the corruption of those who would use religion for immoral purposes. And this even ties back to the question of the residential schools, in that they were sanctioned by the government of Canada, but they were all run by religious institutions.
All true. Again, if you're out there, Jesus it's probably a little more personal for me than that. I know it's kind of an odd thing to express, but I've always had a little bit of, I guess, a mild envy for people who possess the kind of moral certainty that religious adherence brings. If you swallow the story.
Mm-hmm.
You know, having that kind of feeling of belonging and the world having a center, and, you know, and there being some sort of celestial moral compass that eventually will win. You know, I've never had that luxury. I don't feel that. And so for people such as myself, if you really look, you know, deep enough, you have to find another kind of center. You know, and I went somewhere else philosophically and not quite religiously. It harks back to the Tom Thompson song again. It harks back to the idea that, you know, there's a great cycle and nothing ever really disappears. That, you know, the ring you wear on your finger that's made of gold was formed in the heart of a star that blew up to form our solar system. You know, we're all a little energy dance, and if you go on that level, we're all part of everything, and everything is always part of us, and nothing ever disappears. So, you know, maybe consciousness does, but who cares about that anyway? So it was a whimsical look at at the question of religion. The idea that, okay, I'm sure there was historically a person by that name and had a huge impact on the world and on philosophy. So, okay, if the second coming is really going to come, if that's all in the roadmap, I'd say, okay, come on, welcome. Absolutely, that would be totally fine with me. Come down and answer all the questions. I am totally good with that. In fact, I think it would really be a good thing to sort some people in the world out if you came back as a person who wasn't white. And I would do my best, and I hope everybody else would do their best not to like pull the same stuff on you they did the last time. So in a way, it's kind of a whimsical song. I don't know if I can describe it any better than that, but it came from a sort of a whimsical place, slightly cynical place, but whimsical too.
But even in its whimsy, it does address real issues.
Yeah, yeah. It addresses my uncertainty about whether or not people in general and at large are really capable of solving their problems socially and geologically, spiritually.
Mm-hmm.
I sometimes despair of that, and I think part of the song reflects that despair.
Lying by the Sea, the song recalls Alan Kurdi, the young Syrian boy. And we saw that photograph of him being carried out of the ocean. He drowned as his family tried to find safety from the brutal civil war in Syria, and it brings up questions of how we as a country, as a society, respond to all of the recurring refugee crises, which go back many generations and will probably continue to keep going in generations to come. Canada and the United States certainly have had very mixed records in this regard.
That photograph of Alan Kurdi, I have a son who's 29, but at one point he was that size. Mm-hmm. But that little boy with his little shoes and his little shorts lying face down on the beach, it broke my heart. But it not only did that, it was another thing. It went around the world, and it became a shocking image of this is what it means. This is the reality of it. Look at this. And I'm sort of, that was one of the things that made me proud to be a Canadian that year, because that message of that little boy's life meant that a lot of Syrian refugees were able to come into Canada. Mm-hmm. And for that, I am proud. And I think that was the right thing to do, to allow many of those people to come in. And I'm a great believer in immigration. I'm an immigrant myself, for crying out loud. Whether at some point, whether it's 50,000 or 100 or 150,000 years ago, we're all immigrants to this continent from somewhere else. Mm-hmm. But you find more often than not that just the promise of safety, the promise of being able to have a life, or have a life in which your children may be safe and do better than you have, is a powerful incentive for people to work really, really hard and work hard to belong and improve where they are.
Pandemic blues, virtually everyone in the world has had their lives upended in the last 15 or 16 months. And this seems to be an empathetic song, which offers encouragement to us that it will come to an end at some point.
Yeah, I wanted to actually write something that would make people feel better, or just, this is not the first time this has happened to the human race. And, mm-hmm. I think we've all gotten a little soft. If the worst thing in your life is that you have to stay home and you've got internet, my parents lived through a depression and the Second World War on a very active way. And I don't know how they survived, quite frankly. So, yeah. I think we've all gotten a little soft in our survival skills. So I kind of wrote that just to, hey, my favorite line in that song is, "Don't drink the whole 6-pack, put it back in the fridge." So it was a little kind of a little jab and a little fun. And actually wanted to put that out as a country single, but Jeff said, no, they won't play it. And I said, why not? He said, because it has the word pandemic in it. They won't play it.
Yeah.
So there you go.
Shining City on a Hill again. We're in an optimistic mood here, and we seem to be looking forward to a more ideal time with than now, when so much is going wrong in the world, not just in terms of the pandemic, but in all of the other crises that we have to look at, some of which we've talked about already.
My dear friend Alan Rohde, real name Alan Cohnhorst, is also a really good painter, but he's a Nashville songwriter, a really good friend of mine, a guy who, mostly he comes up to Canada when we write together because he likes coming up here better. So in the end days of Trump, actually in the beginning days of Trump, but right through, he just got more and more and more depressed. And, he was, in his mind, he was going to ground. He was watching his country fall apart. He was watching all these things going on and just really despairing. And I thought of that. I mean, Ronald Reagan stole that line from somewhere, but I honestly don't know where. So I just attribute it to Ronald Reagan calling the future of America that shining city on the hill.
I remember, yeah.
But it's a metaphor for that which you aspire to become. And I wrote that to make my American friends feel better. I wanted to make like a little kind of secular gospel song that would just go like, if you reach really, really high and you don't get there, you still get better. And don't lose faith in it. People are dying, and, things are bad. And sometimes it's like that Chinese proverb, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Right now it's 1 step back, but it's not always going to be that way. And again, being a bit of a history nut, I often get into conversations / arguments with people where I point out that the trajectory of history suggests that life is considerably better now than it was 200 years ago. I don't think there's any real dispute of that. When you look at the march of human rights, when you look at medical breakthroughs, when you look at the survival of functioning democracies, everything is actually a little better. There's big problems, but I can get up and lip off about the government. I mean, I did that a couple of times and I got tax audited for my troubles. I think there was some linkage there, but what the hell, they find a way to lean on you, but you don't get put in jail.
Yeah. And that brings us to the final song on the album, Wishes. And in many ways, this final song summarizes many of the themes from the rest of the record. And it's all about how we wish things could be.
Yeah, it's like when Bugs Bunny and the Roadrunner and Yosemite Sam all leap across the stage at the end of the Warner Brothers hour and go turn up at the lights. Yeah, it's the wrap up. Although I don't know if I meant it to be that, but it turned out that it was a pretty good wrap up. And I think the big line in it, like, you might find this hard to believe, but I don't really think that I'm particularly important. So when I wrote the line like I wish with all my heart I'd be some use to you, that's true. I mean, I have 2 ways to influence my world. Well, 3 if you count what I buy, I guess. But the way I vote and the art that I'm able to produce. And however small it may be, the ripples go out and they hit all the shores and you see what happens. But I think there are forces afoot in the world which I have very little control of, but maybe I can influence them in some way.
As we speak now, we've both had our vaccinations, our COVID vaccinations, and the world is starting to open up again. And Hopefully, sometime in the next little while, we'll be seeing live concerts again. Are you planning to take these songs on the road?
Yes, that is the singular thing denied to me during the course of the pandemic that I most miss, being able to get out and play music for people and then see how it works. And I mean, I talk to people after the shows. I go out and talk to people. And, sometimes it's just like fan stuff, but sometimes it's like people actually want to talk about what these things are about.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, right now, the company that does my touring and also the touring for Lunch at Allen's in Canada is we had to cancel 26 shows when things hit because the theaters all closed down. So we've still got those on the books, like all the theaters in Eastern Canada, the Fredericton Playhouse and the Capitals and all that stuff. And then there's a new tour being booked of the theaters in British Columbia, hopefully for November. So that's kind of optimistic, but we'll see if it's still only at the point where you can only put 25% of the house in the theater, then it's not really practical to do it. But I'm hoping that we'll be able to do it.
Yeah, I think if not by the fall, then probably by early 2022, we should be back in concert halls again.
Yeah, I'll be celebrating my 85th birthday at Massey Hall.
Well, thank you for talking to us today. It's been great, and I wish you all the success with this record. The songs are thought-provoking and memorable, and I think this album shines as one of the peaks of your recording career. And there have been some great records over the years.
Well, thank you very much, Mike. I appreciate that. Coming from a hardened criminal such as yourself, it's high praise indeed.
Great. Thank you.